Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third or fourth, I guess it's the fourth in our lecture series, Prehistoric Pee Dee, or Pee Dee Prehistory, sponsored by the Archaeological Institute of Pee Dee and the Florence County Museum. It's great to see such a big crowd here tonight. It's not surprising, delighted to our speaker is. My name is Ben Ziegler. I'm the chairman of the board of the Archaeological Institute of Pee Dee, and we're very excited about this lecture series, about having Chris Judge with us here this evening, about a lot of things going on in archaeology and Pee Dee this spring and summer. I'll talk about those in a minute, and I'll also introduce Chris. But before we do, we're privileged to have members of the Pee Dee tribe of South Carolina here with us, Chief Farr, and they have offered to kick things off for us here this evening with a song dance. Chief, take it away. All right.
Well, it's good to see everybody here. I'm kind of not talking, but this is our cultural leader for the tribe, and him and his family is going to go to stop dance. His name is Mike Dunn.
Yeah, we're going to do a stomp dance. Chris is one of our ladies, and we just wanted to do this to start it off with. We're just going to do one little stomp dance and get it going.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chief Farr. What a fitting way to begin this evening's program. I think I'm safe in saying that if it weren't for our speaker tonight, we wouldn't be here this evening. There are two sort of guiding spirits in archaeology and Pee Dee that I know of, that I revere. One is the dean of the archaeological community, Chris Judge. The other is a man I call the godfather of the archaeological community, and that's Chip Helms, who's sitting in the back. These two men working together over 20 years excavated the cult site of Darlington County, and not only taught us more about cultures that have come before us in the Pee Dee region, but also inspired generations of both professional and avocational archaeologists taking interest in this subject. And it's really the workmanship that Chris did 20 years ago that has led to the creation of the Archaeological Institute of Pee Dee. By the way, we just before before I introduce Chris, let me say the Archaeological Institute of Pee Dee's website went live this week thanks to Andrew Stout and the Florence County Museum. We now have a website. It's got good information on it. It's also got a place where the public can interface with the Institute, can sign up as volunteers, can inquire, and have dialogue with our board members and our support. So please visit that. It is www.aipeedee.org. So please take a look at it. Chris Judge is probably well known to most of you here. Chris has been an archaeologist. He's worked not only on Pee Dee, but all over South Carolina on some of our important sites. In the past 40 years, he was educated at the University of South Carolina. He taught at the University of South Carolina, has been a senior archaeologist at the DNR. He's currently the assistant director of the Native American Studies Institute at the University of South Carolina Lancaster. Chris is one of the nicest people I think I've ever dealt with in any profession. He is a great friend and a great mentor to many of us, and it's a real pleasure to have him here. So please join me in welcoming Chris Judge.
It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Ben and Chip for starting this new institute, and for Andrew Scott and a bunch of other people. I'm just going to say there's 6 local citizens that are involved in this. Miles Cooper, who's head of the Pee Dee Land Trust, Brian Denny with the Darlington County Historical Commission, Terry James with Jamestown Foundation, the 6 of them, and then 6 professional archaeologists. I'm relying on the 6 folks over here to do the lion's share of the work, promoting this, because I think this is something that could really be a special thing over the next few years. I'm going to talk to you today about the Woodland Period. And I'm going to talk about indigenous history. As archaeologists, we have an opportunity to write a history for those whose history was not written down, and for those whose history was at times marginalized and disenfranchised. And through archaeology, we can kind of use that lens of anthropology and archaeology to tell a story. We use artifacts, eco-facts, and features to do that. Those are the traces of the past that are left behind. Artifacts, everybody kind of familiar with those. Arrowheads, spear points, broken pieces of pottery. Eco-facts are things that people take out of nature and use, but don't leave much in the way of evidence of human manipulation. So there have been to an oyster roast, it's the pile of oysters at the end of the night, are eco-facts. They've been used for food, but they haven't been altered in any significant way. Clay's been shaped in fire. A piece of stone has been shaped into a spear point. And then, of course, we use features. And on the far right there, you see a pit. It's been sectioned, cut in half. And it started out probably as a storage pit about 1,500 years ago, and then it was, luckily for the archaeologists, it was used later as a trash pit. And a bunch of things were put into it. Randy Daniel was here a few weeks ago. He talked about the Paleo-Indian and early Archaic period. Sean Taylor was here, and as I understand, gave you a brief introduction to the Middle and Late Archaic periods. And I'm going to talk about the Woodland Period, and then Adam Kate will be here in 2 weeks, I believe it's May 12th, to talk about the final chapter of Native American history prior to the arrival of Europeans and the disruption that follows. The Indians kind of stole my fire in a really good way, because I was going to show you slides, but they got to tell you what I was going to tell you. They're still here. You've heard that old adage, right? God but not forgotten. They're here and forgotten. It's kind of a reverse scenario. And there's a lot of tribes across the state. I can go fast through this. This is them at their opening of their cultural center up in McCall, doing dances, and I certainly wanted to introduce them. I'm just knocked out that they came and did a stomp dance for me tonight, which is really cool. Over in Dillon County is another group of Pee Dee, the Pee Dee tribe of Upper Nation of South Carolina. A lot of people don't know, but during segregated times, there were white schools and there were black schools, and also Indian schools. And one of them was over in Dillon County. And their chief is Carolyn Bolton. So right here in the Pee Dee, there's 2 active groups, but they're still here. So why do they call it the Woodland? Well, when archaeologists were first starting to do American archaeology, guys like Philip Phillips, who Ben's father Nick worked with in the lower Mississippi Valley, they divided the country up kind of based on geography. So it was California was all by itself. There was the plains in the southwest, and the Great Basin out in Nevada and Utah. And when they came to the eastern United States, the only thing they could say is it's wooded. You know, it's a vast forest that provides many resources for people to live on and a place to live. Woodland is best described in the southeast, probably from places like Illinois and Ohio, where they began to build mounds, trade for raw materials over a very wide part of the United States and Canada. They're known as Adena and Hopewell. You see the circa mound in the upper right-hand corner, the snake mound, effigy mound. The hand is a piece of mica from the Appalachian Mountains. Some effigy types there, a bird, a frog, and a bear. And then at York, Ohio, is a whole system of earthworks and octagons and circles that were built for the burial of the dead and the ceremony, the mortuary ceremony. People didn't really live at these sites. This kind of stuff did not spread into South Carolina until very late in the Woodland Period, and I'll talk about that. Here's a map of woodland sites in South Carolina and Georgia, and I've circled a very big void on the map over here in the Pee Dee. And they didn't map stuff in North Carolina, but if they did, it would be full just like the South Carolina and Georgia are. But I think there's a great story to tell here and to fill in the gap in the Woodland Period. And we're going to do that from some of the sites that we've explored here in Cove Site, Standard Edge, and the Dunlap site along the Great Pee Dee River. So what is the Woodland Period? Well, Sean told you about the earliest pottery made in North America is made in South Carolina about 4,500 years ago to about 5,000 years ago. That takes off like a rocket in the Woodland Period with lots of different shapes, lots of different designs, and many different recipes for producing that clay pottery. You start to see the expansion of villages, and that's tied to horticulture. People are starting to garden, and they're gardening native crops. It's not tobacco, it's not corn just yet. It's native plants that they're using. And as you know, when you garden, you've got to protect it from the deer, the neighbors. You got to keep your eye on that. So they start to live in villages and build substantial houses. A lot of people think the bow and arrow has been around for a very long time, but it's not until this period that the bow and arrow arrives in North America. It's a spear technology up until then, and we see the arrival of that. Tribal level of society is something that anthropologists use to show the transition from egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies to societies that are a little more complex. Sean probably talked about the shell rings along the coast, monumental architecture, and those are signs of increasing technological skills, engineering skills, and the building of monuments, things that were built to last, and 5,000 years later, these things are still along the coast. Sea level rises on the way getting there. You start to see some sand burial mounds in the southeast. We have a few in South Carolina that I'll talk about in a minute. And we start to see the arrival of tobacco pipes. And I know that one time I was doing a school lecture and some kid said, "What are they smoking in the pipe?" And I said, "They smoke tobacco." He said, "Well, I think it's marijuana." The only pipe that's ever been tested in South Carolina from a woodland site was sent to the Smithsonian and tested positive for cannabis. And when I was doing this, the kid, I was saying, well, to this kid, marijuana's from Asia. And he said, "You just told us about walking across the land bridge from Asia, and you have it in the pocket." I said, "Next question." The fur traders around the Great Lakes make a list of about 50 different plants that Native Americans smoke in that region anyway. And then I'll talk about stone gorges, polished stone, drilled gorges. There's several really nice ones upstairs in the Native American Museum. So pottery takes off, and pottery kind of goes hand in hand with horticulture, and what they're doing is they're cooking starchy seeds. You know, you can't break into the bag of rice when you're driving home in the car. Bag of popcorn, you can't, because rice has to simmer. And to simmer, you need a fire-durable container. So we see the rise of pottery with the rise of a different subsistence, starchy seeds like maygrass. Now, Randy Daniel was here a few weeks ago. He talked about the early stone tool technologies that you see on the far left there. Sean talked about the one second from the left. And the ones on the far right are bow and arrow. What you notice is there's a dramatic difference in size. And you can't really see it in this two-dimensional photograph, but they're very, very thin compared to the thickness of one of those. So that's the signal that the hunting technology has changed. We had a student out in New Mexico look at our stone from the coal site, do some mineralogy technology to look at where the source is. And it looks like a lot of our stone at the coal site is coming from Ashburn area of North Carolina, traded down, but you realize you can walk across, get in a canoe, and come down the Pee Dee River rather than carry all that rock with you. You can walk up without the heavy load and get in the canoe and bring it down. And they're making tiny little arrowheads. These are made out of rhyolite. This is the rock that occurs up in the Carolina Slate Belt. And then some from Marlborough County here at Pee Dee. The woodland pottery is a little different than the early pottery. The early pottery, we think they're still dropping hot rocks in the pots. They're not putting the pots in the fire yet. But with the woodland, we see, it's upside down in the upper right, a conical base. It's a cone. You get a few rocks and you set that in your fire for cooking. And that check stamp pattern that you see on the upper left there, it's like a waffle or a ladder symbol there. It's very common in the Woodland Period. We see it over here. We see it across Georgia and into North Carolina. Now that pottery is associated with a culture called Deptford. It's largely thought of as a coastal occurrence where people are living along the marshes, along the rivers and the coast. But what we found out in South Carolina is that expands all the way up into the fall lines, all the way up to Charnel and Pee Dee. And then these are a replica by a friend of ours, Scott Jones, and then one from a site on Highway 521 near Camden, where we see the same exact kind of thing going on. And then up in the Piedmont of North Carolina, what they call Yadkin. We call it Deptford in Georgia and South Carolina. They call it Yadkin along the Yadkin River, which of course is what they call the Pee Dee when you get up into North Carolina. And it's tempered with brick. They put sand, Spanish moss, and different things, and they just chop up pulverized quartz and stick that into place. So that one's got a signature that's pretty easy to see. And of course, in the woodland, in this artist rendition here, they're using those pots, building substantial houses, and doing some horticulture, but they're still largely hunter-gatherer fishers, making their living off the land and farms. This is Hanover Grotto tempered. Towards the end of the Woodland Period, we have a lot of the coal sand. They break up broken pieces of pottery, they're pulverizing. You see it in the bottom right. In a magnified cross-section, you see the little bitty pieces of broken sherds in there, and that's known as Hanover. It's named for the coast of North Carolina. And it looks like we have a very, very strong occupation during this period, between about 800 and 1100 AD of the coal sand. And then finally, we end up with something called Camden and Size, which is about 1000 AD, and some carbon dates that have been produced recently, where they cord mark the pottery. They take a cord wrapped stick and they pound it or roll it across the clay while it's leather hard before they fire it. And then in size over. And I'll come back to that one on the left there. We have found some woodland houses in South Carolina. There's several different ways they do it. In the top left there, they've done a little trench in the shade there, and they put posts into it to make that foundation earth fast for the structure. There's a little opening, and then the thing to the left there is a shell moon. That's from Mount Pleasant, and then there's one over here where there's a trench and posts in it that's from the Santee River. So we have what's called wall trench structures. Some of them, the woodland one is the possible one there, and then a Mississippian structure. So this one has an entryway to it, a little antechamber. This is one that the Pee Dee tribe, I think everybody in the front row was working on that, a couple in the back. And the second row there in the middle, built what I would think would be a good idea of what one of the woodland style houses may be up at the tribal grounds. This one stands southbound at Charlestown Landing, a circular house, and it has the grotto temper and broken sherd temper pottery inside of it. Did you work on this house? On the River, John? Or build one like that? You did? I thought you did. This is a bark style house. A lot of the early explorers and naturalists, Mark Catesby talks about they built a bark house, and so this one at Charlestown Landing, like you see the pattern in the upper right, maybe that one like that. And then this is from North Carolina, where you see there's a palisade wall on the far right there. Here it is over here. There's a series of these structures inside. Now, we haven't found these in South Carolina yet because we haven't done big excavations, but I think they're out there and we just gotta find them. When Sir Walter Raleigh's expedition came to the coast of North Carolina in the 1580s, this style of house was seen. These are frames covered in reed mats. So they take reeds or canes and make mats out of them. You can flop it over the roof and have it open in the summer or enclose it in the winter or when you want privacy. And then finally, one structure that we see in the woodland, we haven't found it in South Carolina, earth lodges. Where they build an earthen, it looks like an igloo, instead of ice, it's earth. This bottom one is from Oklahoma over in Georgia, and the one at the top there is in western North Carolina. A lot of times when they collapse, they build mounds out of those structures. I think we have these here. We have to go and find them. Some tobacco pipes. These are from Fort Bragg, and they're grog tempered. So we know they go with that hangover component in the latter part of the Woodland period. We put a reed inside those there. There's some stone pipes. There's one from the Kiawe site up on the Yankton River, the bottom left there. The one on the top right is from a mound over in near Pembroke, over in North Carolina in Lumbee Land. That's really interesting. The two views of that pipe on the top are from a site in Sumter County, and then the one on the bottom is a very similar one that was found at the Dunlop site up around Society Hill. So it looks like stone to the west and north, and then clay to the south. And here's that piece of pottery that I showed you earlier. It's got this kind of cross hatching on it. And this is a turtle plastron. This is the bottom shell of the turtle from a shell made down in Georgetown County that has that same incising on it. So I'm not sure what that means symbolically, but it's interesting to see that in two mediums, one on a turtle shell and one on a piece of pottery. And I suspect that might have been a rattle. They would make rattles out of shells, and this one has been decorated, I think rather fancy. There's also a lot of bone tools where preservation is good. They're using turkey and deer bone for various kinds of implements. The ones at the top are beamers. They're interpreted as used to take the scales off of fish when you're cleaning them. Some beads, and then some tubular beads, and on the bottom left, some awls for punching holes in leather when you're stitching together buckskins for clothing and blankets and shelters and things like that. You keep showing up, too. Polished stone borders. Let me go ahead one slide. This is what they look like whole. Are found from the middle Archaic through the late Archaic through the middle Woodland. And because they look like the silver gorgets that the Revolutionary War officers, you've seen George Washington's portrait, he's wearing this silver gorget. They've been interpreted as that. I did a study on these. And when they have been found in burials, they are not here where you would expect them. They're down by the wrist. And some people have interpreted them as an archer's wrist guard, so that the bowstring doesn't slap you on the soft part of the wrist. My colleague Tarek and Gafar and I experimented with this. We wondered if there was a pocket fisherman. You tie your line around it, you got your hook, you throw that out, you've got a handle. Some people have interpreted them as bull lures. The Australian Aborigines use them. You tie a string, you walk about 10, 12 foot long string, you woof, 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 and it makes a noise. Some of them are notched. You see there, and the top one's got these notches along it. Some people think it might be a turkey call, where you've got a little piece of wood that you're rolling on there. Whatever these are, they're commonly found in woodland sites. And one of the interesting things is they're almost always found broken, and there's a good possibility that these are being intentionally destroyed for some reason that we don't understand. They're fairly solid. They're made of banded slate, holes drilled through them. probably pretty hard to do even with a stone drill. I'd imagine that bit would wear out and you have to put another one maybe quite frequently. But the top one came from the Culp site, and the bottom one, the Chief Pond's holding, came from the Savannah Edge site. Culp and Savannah Edge are on the Great Pee Dee Heritage Preserve at Mechanics. And then, like I said, there's a couple of really nice ones upstairs. Now, we don't think burials much in American archaeology anymore. We've come to respect them as things that we should not touch. But where they've been excavated in the past are either ossuaries, which are mass burials. There's one on the Little Pee Dee River in South Carolina, where people's bodies are left to rot and at some point are defleshed, and then placed in mass pits. And then these pits on the right there with 5 or 6 individuals in one hole in the ground. Some of them have the Huron up in Upper New York State, where every 10 years have a burial ceremony. Everybody died in a 10-year period. Bones would be placed in very large pits. This is the French call it Charnel House. It's where John White drew this in coastal North Carolina, 1585. The bodies of the elite people are laid out, the flesh is rotted off. The boxes you see at the back have the bones of the defleshed dead. And there's reports that in some cases of them maybe rubbing them with bear oil once a year until they're placed in these open pits. Now, across North Carolina, we start to see the arrival of the mounds I showed you earlier that start up in the Ohio Valley and in Illinois, arrive in the very latter stages of the Woodland Period. And the little black dots that you see in Cape Fear and the Little Pee Dee drainage over the North Carolina coastal plain are where these mounds have been found in the sand hills. One of them is the McLean Mound. This mound was first gotten to by looters who got in and did a lot of damage prior to the archaeologists getting in there. But these are maybe 50 or 60 feet on the long axis, maybe only 2 or 3 feet tall, which are used to bury the dead. And if we look at what they're doing in the Midwest, in the early part, they're burying people with everyday items. Their tobacco pipe, maybe some arrow points down in the burial. At the end, they're starting to put very elaborate things in there. Grizzly bear teeth, silver objects, copper objects, things traded from across Canada and the United States, which seemingly are being acquired to include in the Great Lakes. And so we see what appears to be the early stage. And so there's clay pipes in this mound, 2 that you see there, and then those are miniature clay pots. That's their actual size. We're not sure if these are paint palettes, if these are something that children made, or if they have some kind of special function, but they have the rock temple, the broken up Hanover kind of temple in them. Down on the Georgia coast is another one. I've always been fascinated with this one. Most of the mounds have a primary interment of an adult male. Subsequent burials are of both genders and of all ages. So you figure that maybe that's the chief, they're buried in a shaft, and then the rest of the family is included, like you might have in a family grave, mausoleum, or the family grave set. And so it starts out in the bottom pit here, 4 females are buried, which goes against the model that we see. But the South Asian tribes are matrilineal. They trace their heritage through the mother, so this might be a nod to that. Now, some of you have probably read Bishop Gray's book on the Old Shirals. And he has an account in there where he says, there are some mounds. They're similar to the ones that William Bartram describes for his travels through Florida in the 1740s. He says, in certain accounts of the Pee Dee, extensive settle and many tumuli, mounds, were once seen. He's right about the time, right after the Civil War. He says they were evidently placed in 2 layers, which is very similar to the Cloud Mound, where they bury the 4 women below ground, they add a layer to the mound, they add another layer, and there's that second layer of determinant down in the mound. this part was really interesting. He says, with the bones were found a stone hatchet, a beautiful arrowhead, and a pipe. Strange to relate, the smell of tobacco was perceptible several hours after they excavated out of the ground. So that looks like the early things you would see in the Midwest, where there's everyday items that they would have with them. The stone axe, the pipe, and an arrowhead would be buried with them, but in a period much later than we would see it elsewhere. All right, let's talk about some sites in the Pee Dee. We'll start up at the top there with the Dunlap site. We've got the triangular arrow points, the pipe I showed you earlier, a clay disc which has a lot of wear around it. I don't know if this is like worked as a flywheel or something, but it's about the size of plastic lid on a coffee cup when you get it at the convenience store. It was about this big. And it looks like it had a piece of wood through it and a lot of abrasion on it. And then there's that Camden incised 1,000-year-old pottery on the bottom right there. The pH of the soil at the Dunlap site is such that we get bone preservation. It's very rare that you see that outside of some context with shell. We think there were Eden mussels, and those mussels have dissolved in the soil, but the calcium in the shell has leached, allowing the animal bones to preserve. So on the bottom left, we have bird bones. The vertebrae on the bottom right are fish bones. The ones on the top are snake. And then, anybody know what the top left one is? Really large prehistoric fish. Sturgeon. Those are the scutes of the sturgeon, which are these really bony plates that you see along them. And so that's evidence of them fishing. And sturgeon are gigantic, and they are anatomists. They swim into marine fish. If they swim into the rivers right now, the striped bass are probably in the river here. They are in Columbia. And this is a fish that each one you got will have a lot of meat. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And they're also making some bone tools at the Dunlap site. On the left are two awls with a turkey bone at the top and a larger deer bone at the bottom. And then two views of something that I never really understood what it is. It's tapered at the far right there, and then it's got a hole drilled through it, and it broke at that hole, which is really interesting. But we don't usually see this kind of bone preservation in septic sites in South Carolina. So that makes Dunlap kind of unique. This is a LiDAR map. They shoot a laser beam out of an airplane at an angle, and it maps the shadow of everything it hits. It comes out of the blink angle, and the shadow is mapped. That's the Culp site in the upper right, Savannah Edge in the middle, and then this is Hurricane Branch. Yeah, this is Hurricane Branch where it hits the old hospital lake, coming up like this, and then getting into the uplands over here. We did some excavations at Savannah Edge. Once, 2014, we were flooded out. We couldn't get to the coal site. We excavated here at this site. This is a block. Two broken gorgets came out of this block. The one I showed you, and another one now was burned and fragmented into such small pieces. It's not even really worth me showing you a picture of it. Here's a conical base, two views of a conical base jaw from Savannah Edge. And then we have both the stemmed woodland. Two different kinds of arrow points in the woodland. Stemmed ones. And these look like diminutive versions of the archaic points. And then the triangular shaped ones of various sizes. We did a survey back in 2007 into the uplands of Hurricane Branch. And we have both middle archaic and woodland sites in there. We need to get back into that at some point. And then most of our attention, as you know, was focused on the Culp site. At the Culp site, we designed a 17% sample of the property, which is a couple of acres. On the left are 50-centimeter test squares. A good crew can dig 3 of those in a day. And then on the right, you see our next sample size, a 2-meter square. And at the Culp site, it would take us almost 2 weeks to dig one of those. After many years, we had kind of pockmarked the site with these large ones. These are the smaller tests. These are the larger tests. And all the things you see drawn in those squares are features, different kinds of pits, post holes, both historic and from the pre-compact era. But the preservation of features in sandy deposits like we have here is highly unusual. It's one of the things to me that makes the coal site so special. So I was telling my colleagues, I didn't think we had any houses at the coal site. We hadn't found any substantial ones. And remember Fred Sanford would yell at the lawn and say, "Big dummy!" They didn't do it that politely, but they said, "We don't dig a big enough hole to find a house, Chris." And so they convinced me to do it. And when we did, we pretty much did find a house. Park is inside the house, and everything to the right and to the top of the yellow line there is outside the house. The white you see is freshwater mussel shell, and as you'll see in a minute, that's going to become a very large pit underneath the roots you see coming in there. We had several large pits that went down. This is our small shell test that we did in '97. This excavation started in 2007. And this is one of these pits. This is over 3 feet in both directions. I think it's a storage pit. It's bell-shaped. It's a little hard to see, but it looks like a bell, upside down. And I imagine they would have stored acorns and hickories and nuts, mass foods down in the ground. These are sand. It's an old beach dune of sand. And even our excavation units, after 2 weeks, are starting to collapse. So I think these storage pits were short-lived, and when they started to fall apart, they threw garbage in them. And this one has about 5 different episodes of deposition. There's some clean sand right there. I interpret this as a summertime one, where the flies were getting to it, it didn't smell good, and they sealed it with some clean sand. The final episode was put a bunch of shell on it. And so what happened was, this shell that you see, they filled the garbage can. You've seen this before, and people keep throwing stuff in it. It starts to get all over the ground. Well, that's what happened here. Here's another bell-shaped pit that's nearby. And this one is really interesting for all the different things that we learned from this one. And we subjected it to a lot of analysis. So inside this pit was this pot that you see here. Now the pot is only about 70% whole. I have never showed a picture of the other side of it, where there's a big gap. This doesn't seem like it's worth my life. But it's not whole, I should say. It's glued together. The dark things that you see coming out of the wall here are those shells. The lighter color things that you see there are animal bone. We've got deer, we've got turkey, we've got squirrel, raccoon, 7 different kinds of fish, and lots of turtles. And the interesting thing is, only the turtle bones are burnt. Everything else is non-burnt. And you ever get one of those soups out of the machine and put it in the microwave? It's in its cup already? I think that's what those are. Or there's some taboo that they burn turtle shell paradise. I'm thinking of just cooking them right in their shells, and that's what the burning is about. So this is a feature. It's got a lot of ecofats in it. We have lots of plant remains, which I'll share with you in a second. And there are 4 triangular arrow points in this pit. The carbon dates, this is the 863 one. These are our carbon dates for the Hanover Broad Temple pottery. Around 800, round the dates, about 800 to 1100. Probably closer to 1025 and before. I think I like the 3 days, I think. That last one may be too late, maybe not. But they're starting to garden. And in that pit, we've got a lot of different things. We've got acorn, we've got cane, grape, hickory, maygrass, which is one of those starchy seeds, and of course persimmon. Persimmon almost always shows up in our pits. It's one of the few fruits. Grape and persimmon are about all you get in the southeast part of the introduction of a lot of exotic foods. Back in that other pit, we've got black walnut, we've got persimmon again, and then the bottom right there, feature 56, we've got a curry. And that's probably a bottle gourd, or a squash of some kind. And so that's really interesting that they're starting to garden, and then in that pit we can find those things. Now one of the things that I know I'm talking a lot, I'm almost done. One of the things that I've really been interested in is settlement. You know, the reason I was arguing I don't think there's a house at the coal site was I think it's some place they live in the summer. You don't build a substantial house and the archaeologists can't find it. Okay? So I propose coal on the right there as a spring-summer application. And then going up into Hurricane Branch, I propose that that's a winter application. Up here in the uplands, it's much drier, you're away from the river. And there's a series of Carolina bays up there, these large elliptical depressions that probably held water in the past. They have incredible plants that grow in them. Of course, animals are attracted to them. And on one side is a nice sand where you can place your house. It's a well-drained soil in the wintertime. The circles are, archaeologists use meters. A meter is what you put your money when you park your car downtown. I know. But we use meters instead of feet. So these are 10-kilometer foraging range. That's 6.2 miles. And what we see in hunter-gatherers, they often establish a base camp, and they range in a certain area until the resources are exploited, and then they move on. So I'm thinking in the woodland period, when they're starting to garden and stay down, maybe they had two places, a spring, summer, and a fall, winter. These models are based on hunter-gatherers who were studied by anthropologists in modern times, and one of our go-to cultures is the Cumbushman of the Kalahari Desert of Africa, who make their living hunting and gathering. The men at the top two pictures are going out hunting. They go after giraffes and zebra, very large animals. The women collect mongongo nuts. On the bottom left, they're collecting mongongo. You ask them, why do you eat mongongo nut? They say, it tastes good. But it's a really high value, caloric value plant in their environment. It's predictable. The guys go off hunting, they come back 2 weeks later, they haven't killed anything. You go to the nuts as a source of protein. And so based on these models, they have these temporary villages. They forage in about a 3 or 6 kilometer range. And when they exploit those resources, they just pick up and move to a new place and start that over. So when I look at that, the yellow circles are on known woodland sites near the coal site. And there's a little bit of overlap there. That Venn diagram looking thing right above the word spring is actually the Savannah Edge site, which is a really interesting site. We're curious. It's just this little blip out in the swamp. And so I find that really interesting. And I wonder where else would they go. So I'm going to throw some red circles in there. And when I put the red circles in there, they're almost always at Black Creek, headwaters of creeks that go into Black Creek River. And there's about 15 of them. So you would even have, you could move around in a month. But you could probably go to those from your blue circled winter camp or summer camp and make your living in a very tight area. The other possibility is they could go down Black Creek all the way to its confluence with Great Pee Dee River around I-95 and then make their way back up to the coast center. So this is armchair theoretician me thinking, but I really want to kind of work in the next few years and try to test this model for the woodland and see if that is indeed going on. Wait a minute. My story is not over yet. Almost over. Oh, what's that? Okay. And then I got a phone call. Those of you who know Ben Ziegler, he called me up and he said, "You don't know me. I know Chip Helms. He gave me your phone number." I said, "I know who you are. I know your sister. I know your nephew. Your brother visited the coal site." And pretty soon, he had convinced a lot of us to come over here and work on a Baptist church from the 18th century. And so pretty soon, we were digging holes over here in January. We found some good evidence of that church, but you guessed it, it's largely a woodland site. This is Andrew Nicole, two historic archaeologists that we enlisted to work on the church. And they came up to the Parker Annex in Columbia going, "What do we have?" Well, you got woodland stuff. You got the ground tempered pottery, you got the cord mark pottery. And you think of these as repair holes. You get a crack in the pot and you tie it together. It's not going to hold liquid, but it's kind of extending the life of that pot. And then, of course, we have the two different types of woodlands, arrow points that we know the stemmed on the form of the triangle myth. So I think there's a great future for the Archaeological Institute of the Pee Dee. I'm thrilled that Chip and Ben asked me to be involved in this. I hope that y'all will come and visit us when we're in the field and support our excavations. During our 20 years over here, we have amazing support from the Darlington and Florence communities. We probably could not have done this without you, in particular Chip back there, helping us get through this. And we're talking about another 20-year project. I think I'm not sure, I mean, it could be a lot of them. But listen to some young people, there is some holes, gaps in our knowledge archaeologically over here in the Pee Dee, and I hope that we can fill in some of those gaps. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to take any of your questions. You've been great over this. You didn't throw anything, you didn't interrupt me.
Any questions for Chris?
Chief Park.
You thought about the Woodland Period. At that time, it wasn't
You were all over, yeah. See, the archaeologists in different states give different names to different pottery types and stuff, and I think that has been challenging us to really see the picture whole. But you're absolutely right. The boundaries in the past were not what they are today. And I would imagine the Pee Dee tribe would have been going up and down all over the coast and maybe even up into the mountains. Right. It could have been. Yes, absolutely. Good interpretation for everything. Other questions?
I've got a question, Chris. What demarcates the Woodland Period from Mississippi period? What transition?
You know, we have cubby holes into those four broad categories that you see there. And Adam will talk about this on May 12th. But in North Carolina coast, I think they lived in woodland all the way up to European contact. Here and in the
temple period, it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, yeah. We have cubby-holed it as a temple period. The Mississippian period, the changes that we see is they start to grow exotic cultures, in particular maize, corn. The mounds that are used for burial in the woodland become substructures for the houses of chiefs, mortuary structures, and even in some cases they're described by early scholars as temples. And agriculture becomes the chief subsistence. They're still hunting and gathering, but they've gone full tilt looking into agriculture. And it looks as if maybe a new religion has arrived in the Mississippian period, based on what we see in the Mississippi Valley that spreads eastward throughout that period. So those are the main differences. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for having me, everybody here.